Good afternoon, everyone. Jess here from Practice Dynamics. Thank you so much for joining so promptly for today's webinar. Our webinar topic is client engagement strategies, which is following on from last month's webinar. If you haven't had a chance to watch it yet, that's okay. There's only a couple of slides where we are revisiting some of that content, but you will be able to watch that back at any time via Xplan Expert. And this topic we are extending on and looking into the SOA production and SOA presentation process, as well as implementation. This is a webinar, which means if you do have a question as we run through the presentation, you will need to pop that into the question and answer area of the Zoom webinar. Feel free to pop that in at any time. We will definitely attend to those questions either during or after the webinar, just to ensure that the flow of the webinar isn't interrupted. If you do have a specific question, pop it in. Sometimes it's easier to address at the time, and sometimes we have to wait if we're going back in time. So always best to pop the question when you think about it. This session is being recorded, so if you do want to watch it back, it will be available on Xplan Expert for you should be this afternoon, if not tomorrow. So without further ado, we are going to kick off with today's webinar. So with our webinar, we always look at when you might use something, how you would use it, and why you would use it. And so we're going to continue on in that fashion with our presentation today. So we're breaking it up into two parts. The first part of today's presentation is around that SOA preparation phase and production phase. Now, for those of you that perhaps didn't come along to the session before, we are thinking about this from a client perspective. So we're using Xplan, but the client will receive something in result of that. So when we're looking at this, we're not looking about how to use the Xplan efficiently to create an SOA. It's around what parts of Xplan you might use in this whole process that you would then share with the client to enhance the client's experience as they move through that SOA phase. So we touched on Client Portal in a big way in the last session. In particular, our focus was around that fact-finding mission, and a little bit we talked about the messaging to the clients. But when it comes to SOA preparation and production, this is really plays a key role in that process. In that, if your client has done a fact find, but perhaps you need more information from them, more attachments, the client portal is great for you to seek those attachments in a secure way. Or if you need them to check something, again, you can share them back with the client in a secure way. So the client portal messaging is going to have a huge impact on the client experience. And what we found recently is that you can actually create custom folders. And that might be a great way to kind of break up your messaging. So these custom folders, we've only actually rolled this out to one group so far. And we are hoping that more people take this up. It's quite a straightforward process in that it links to your file note types. So you might have a file note type for SOA preparation, and then you can kind of park all of your messages to your client under that folder. And then you might have other folders in the future around reviews and that kind of thing. So I have popped in a link to the community article, which does talk about the soft questions. Sorry, apologies. That does talk about the custom folders inside Client Portal. So what the team need from Xplan is basically just the folder name or the file note type. So for example, this one's client agreement, and it's going to be based on a particular file note type. So the folder name you get to pick, and the file note type needs to match back to the file note type in Xplan. They do not have to be the same either. So you might call your file note type SOA preparation, and you might call the folder on Client Portal pre-SOA information required, or whatever the words might be. You'll probably come up with better words than me. And then you basically just send that off to the Xplan support team via Jira, or probably more the Client Portal support team. They'll go into the Embraco system and set that up for you. And again, you can also have more than one file note type for that folder. So this picture here kind of shows you what they do. So they put the folder name in, and then they type in the file note types that you would like to be linked to that folder. So quite a good little option available for you when it comes to the client portal and this kind of phase. And again, not necessarily limited to the SOA preparation and production phase, certainly can extend further on into your advice process, including things like review and that kind of thing. You might also want a folder for things like estate planning, maybe one for Centrelink. You could have a few folders if you wanted to. The other thing as well is for you to send communications back to your clients. So you might send them a copy of their SOA, you might send them attachments for PDSs. So the client portal can also be for the client to receive messages from you. So great for the client to compose a message and attach secure information. Great for you to share information back with the client as well. Last session, we talked about the base email template, and that's really important. I wanted to reiterate that because email templates are very essential part of communicating back and forth. So again, when we're looking at the communication, we are looking at having that base kind of visual template of what you want your branding to look like out of X Plan and creating a whole bunch of email templates for this phase. So again, your workflow should be the one that dictates that flow of that communication piece. So if your workflow is set up to track, SOA preparation around, complete the paraplanning request, send it off to the paraplanner. When the paraplanner completes the SOA and sends it back to the advisor for checking, you know that SOA is nearly done. So you would, in most instances for this particular part, is probably going to be communication back with the client, but keep in mind you've also got that ability to also, refer out, communicate back to that client's referrer if they're really invested in that journey, especially if it's like a referral source that's an accountant, and there's some time sensitive parts to it. Maybe they need to set up an SMSF so they can get a loan and buy that property that they're looking to buy in their SMSF. So you want to keep the referrer informed. Your workflow can link those emails and choose whether it goes back to the entity, whether it goes to the referral source, to their accountant, to their mortgage advisor, whatever the case may be. You've got that flexibility here to pick who receives it or who receives a copy of it. So when we're thinking about the SOA production phase, there are a couple of email templates that stand out to me that you might consider using for communication purposes. And again, we're thinking about that workflow. So this one here is about, confirming that the SOA is in production phase. So this might be one of those things where it finishes with the new client process and it creates that task for the pre-SOA workflow. And so once it moves into that phase, this email gets sent out to the client to confirm that we've started, we've got all the information that we need from you, we're starting to prepare the SOA, takes about 8 to 12 working days, and we'll schedule a presentation appointment once it's been finalized. So you might change the wording a little bit here in terms of, the messaging that you have, but a great kind of automated thing. And especially if that doesn't really change, you don't need to prompt to edit. You can just send it straight to the client on completion of a particular task in your process. This one might be when the client or paraplanner's done their bit and it flicks over to the advisor to check. So, we're not finished, but we're pretty close to finishing. And that might be a prompter to tell the client that we're going to get in touch to book your appointment. That might also just be a booking link back to a booking schedule. We talked about that in the last presentation, where you might include something like a Calendly link or a bookings link, or a Zoom scheduler link. The client can go in and book that appointment directly with you. Again, your messaging is whatever you want it to say, but advice production phase, we're about to move into the advice presentation phase, book your appointment. And of course, once the appointment has been booked for whichever medium you've chosen, you'll likely want to send them that confirmation of appointment email. So you can see along the way, these have all got different colors at the bottom, but the branding's quite similar throughout. And what you might choose to do is have one color for SOA production, different color for reviews. You might, play around with your color choices, that kind of thing. But you want to try and keep your messaging similar. The font's the same, the branding the same. So when they see this email, they go, I know who that's from. That's from my financial planner. So that's just three example email templates that could all be built into your advice process to keep the client informed of where they're at, how things are progressing. And there's nothing worse than telling your client it's going to take 3 weeks to produce the SOA and then maybe don't talk to them at all for that 3 weeks. Whereas if you can just give them that little touch point to say we've moved on to the next phase, just might give that extra bit. All right. Janet, thank you for your query. We will address that at the end when we talk about Client Portal a little bit more. So we'll address that one later on. Now we're thinking about SOA, the actual production of the SOA, and what do areas of X Plan you might think about utilizing when to enhance and help out with the SOA. So this one isn't one that I would necessarily put into the SOA, but it is something that advisors might consider using as a helpful tool when presenting insurance advice. If your client's, sensitive to the cost of insurance, particularly some of the more expensive covers like trauma, and they might be thinking, hey, I can save myself $1 if I don't get it. This is a great tool to help demonstrate the likelihood that they'll make a claim, which may help them kind of understand why certain insurances are, also different pricing points as well. So this life risk calculator is available for anyone that subscribes to Risk Researcher, and it is available through the Risk Researcher side menu under Risk Tools Life Risk Calculator. Now I'm doing this on a demo site, so my color choices aren't the best. So I do apologize. That is a terrible color. In fact, I can't even read that without highlighting it. So please forgive the color choices. You can see over here, this is a much nicer color theme than this one. But what we do is we look at the client that we've got. So maybe you've got a 34-year-old female. So you'll pop in the fact that it's a 34-year-old female. And let's maybe look at death cover. So if they're looking at death cover, there's a 86% chance that if they make a claim, it's going to be based on sickness versus accident. And I love looking at that and flipping it over to males because what we find that the accident one certainly increases. So, they take a few more risks maybe than females do. Kind of shows you that these are quite good stats. And look, the chance of them making a claim by age 65 is pretty low. So they're making a claim about 11% likelihood that they'll make a claim on their death cover, which is another reason why death cover might seem a lot cheaper. People often get it and hope that they never need it. Of course, you never want to need trauma or TPD, but if you have a look at the likelihood of making a claim, including trauma and TPD, that drops. So there's actually a significantly higher likelihood for trauma and TPD than death. And so that's why having death cover alone may not be sufficient for them. These are also some of the stats around survivals, which is really quite good. So if we're looking at something like prostate cancer, the 5-year survival rate is really high, which is great. But it does mean that they need to be able to afford to go through the treatment. And so that's where trauma cover is really important. I could talk about this all day, but I just wanted to point that out. These are all reportable. So as you kind of find the display that you want, you can hit the report button and include that along with, your advice. So giving you a little extra something to provide along with your advice process. And then when it comes to the SOA itself, you might want to look at what does your SOA document look like and how are you integrating with the various modules. And I could have put together about 20 minutes worth of slides here on all of the great tables and things like that you can include. And most of you that have joined today have access to good inputs. But I wanted just to highlight a few of them that perhaps, if you are thinking about the way that you're presenting information, visually really helps a client. So this one here is the insurance product comparison report that can come out the back of an SOA. It can also be generated from Risk Researcher. So what we want to see with something like this is the ability for you to kind of bring through the logos of the different providers and making it visually appealing by putting some color on the page. And then we're looking at like the different premiums and cumulative premium in this instance to look at how much over the time. It highlights the client the significant difference in how much insurance costs, but it also shows them the score. So, the higher the score, the more likely they'll claim on everything and there's less exclusions, or less things that they don't cover for. But you look at something like this one, really low overall score, quite a high premium. So you're getting a better score up here, lower premium. Of course, you've got to justify that with the client, but visually it helps kind of, I guess, cement potentially why you've selected one provider over another. Xtools Plus outputs and graphs and things like that are really powerful to show the client over time. This one is a bit of a calm graph, and you do have to probably explain it to the client. It's not as easy to read because it does have a left hand and a right hand um, kind of axes. So your net assets is looking at, 1 million up to 4 million. They're sitting here around the 3.5 at retirement, starting off here about the 1.5. The other axis here is their expenditure and income and capital drawdown. So you've got that graph going here from 0 up to 400K. But again, visually quite nice. They can see their assets are growing, their expenditures coming down over time. Could be a nice little one to show the client. When we're looking at insurance recommendations, here the main thing is around maybe bringing through their logo. So getting them ready to identify the logo to the provider. And when they start seeing application forms and, insurance reports and things like that, they're getting used to seeing that logo and identifying that is their insurance provider. This graph is coming from WealthSolver. So we've got a graph from Xtools Plus. This graph is from WealthSolver and shows the value of their super fund over time. It's a terrible one because I've actually put them in a worse position. So I wouldn't be giving that one to the client per se, but it gives you an idea of how their super fund's going to track. And we're not needing to use Xtools Plus for that. We can get that one directly from the WealthSolver product. This one here is just kind of combining tables and pie charts next to each other. So this is a portfolio one in particular, where we've got a table and a pie chart of their risk profile. So visually, you can put things neatly on a page so it presents well to the client. They can clearly see the divide of the different asset classes makeup, especially if numbers might be a bit much on them. The visuals of the pie chart can help, but if they want to get down into the nitty gritty, that table with the numbers allows them to do that. So this one here is a portfolio output with a pie chart and a table. And this one here, because we're going to move into implementation very, very soon, is looking at the strategies that you're recommending and the implementation of those strategies into an implementation plan. So I wanted to highlight that because this kind of a inclusion and having your client being able to identify, all right, for superannuation, we're doing these steps, these 3 things. These are all the implementation steps that I need to follow. And there's like a little tick box so they can kind of track it over time. This particular one comes out in the implementation section of an SOA, but I'm also going to talk about how you might implement that into things like notes in Xplan to help track their implementation. So again, we're looking at outputs that the client is going to be able to visually identify certain key characteristics and presents well in an SOA. So it's the way that you present your advice and these kind of inclusions from the different modules and how to get the most out of them is really important to help with the client experience. Once you've presented the SOA to your client, you might think about how you're going to get the client to perhaps proceed with your advice. So Xplan's digital signature is available through Client Portal, and it's great for things like authority to proceed. So you could link your authority to proceed to Xplan's digital signature process. The client can approve to proceed with your authority. Digital signature is great for internal documents that are proceed, don't proceed. Okay. Digital signature does not allow the client to pick from different outcomes. It also doesn't have a signature feature. What it does is it sends a code to the client's mobile that they enter under the digital signature as an acceptance code. And by entering that code, it accepts that document. And of course, from this digital certificate that you get from the digital signature, it'll include who signed it, the IP address, the mobile phone number used, etc., for that kind of sign off. So it typically meets a lot of your internal requirements for authority to proceed and those sorts of things. It will be unlikely that that would be accepted by a third party, though. So if you wanted it to be, some sort of application form, or even if it's like fee consent that you need to share with a product provider, unlikely that the digital signature feature of Xplan is going to do all of that. Now, Janet, I'm going to answer your question. Janet has asked about the cost of Client Portal. And I think this is a nice time to bring up the cost of Client Portal. So depends on if you're on a licensee site. Typically, most licensees might already have Client Portal set up, in which case there is no cost for you to allocate licenses to your client. So the use of Client Portal for access and the client logging in is completely free. Digital signature, though, there is a cost of $1 per signature, but it is capped at $25 per month per user. So what that means is if you're going to set up digital signature and there's two of you in the office, just use the one login every time. Once you hit 25 signatures from that login's allocation of digital signature, you cap out and you don't get charged any more. So digital signature is $1 a signature. For those of you that perhaps haven't got Client Portal, you don't have a licensee version of Client Portal, or you do, but you want your own branded version of Client Portal, there is an upfront cost for Client Portal. And it just depends how involved you want to be in the process. If you want Practice Dynamics involved in Client Portal, then there is a fee for us to build it, and Xplan's fee as well, but it's worthwhile doing. Again, you're looking at about $350 for the base cost of Client Portal, and a lot of your time spent going back and forth. Versus engaging us, you're anywhere between $1,000 and $2,000 of investment, and you'll get an entirely fully customized Client Portal with fact find journeys, portfolio reports, and the like. So, only cost to Client Portal is the upfront fee and digital signature. So, if you do need to go down the path of getting clients to fill in information better, you might look at an alternative digital signature system, and there's plenty out there on the marketplace. If you do use DocuSign, which is incredibly popular with financial planners, there is a DocuSign integration with Xplan. So DocuSign obviously allows you to put in things like dates, wet signatures, tick boxes, etc. It's more likely to be accepted by those third parties. But you do require your own subscription. So if you have a subscription to DocuSign, it is $0 to integrate that with Xplan. So Xplan don't charge you at all for the DocuSign integration, but you still have to do your DocuSign part. What the Xplan integration does is it can house the document and push it to DocuSign, and that way it's shared amongst the two systems, so you don't have to save it in both places. And then when the client signs it in DocuSign, it confirms it back in Xplan. So it is great to kind of keep all of your documents in one place, but you do have to set it up in Xplan and push it to DocuSign. Then you have to go to DocuSign and mark off your signing places. So, the integration's great. And as I said, saves you on having to double upload, but you still have to do in both places something. You don't get away with just doing it in one area. Links here back to the community if you do have DocuSign. If you're on the support model with us, we'll do the steps for the site administrator steps, and we'll give you instructions on how to use DocuSign. The other one is about linking those communication pieces. We've talked about sending emails out of Xplan, and look, to be honest, Client Portal is still the better way to communicate back and forth, but it's not going to stop a client from emailing you. They're still going to email you. So if you are using Xplan as your source of truth, your paperless office, you want to make sure that you're putting all of those emails back into Xplan, then File to Xplan is your friend. File to Xplan version 3 in particular is great because you can file your response either to a brand new file note, or you could link it to an existing file note. You could file just the attachments if you don't want to file the entire file note as well. So they send back a fact file, you just want to attach that to an existing file note. You don't have to file the whole thing. You can just file the attachment. You can create a file note on the fly and don't even have to use an email in File to Explain version 3. So I highly recommend that you install that as long as you're using Microsoft 365 or a most recent version of Microsoft. If you're not on the 365 version, you'll be able to install plugin version 3. If you are using new Outlook, you will need to use version 2 because that is the only one that's compatible with new Outlook. And if you are on RSID login, when you log into RS to File to Explain version 3, you will need to use SSO as your sign-in option. All of that is available in terms of help manuals from us. So if you have any trouble, let us know. If you do not have File to Explain, go research it. It's incredibly powerful and it closes the loop on that communication when it's done via email and not done via client portal. All right, we're about halfway through, so big stretch because we're about to move into the implementation phase. So when we're thinking about implementation, we're thinking about the way that we communicate with the client on their implementation progress. So you're going to have your own process around, communications and what the client needs to do. But how do we get the client to understand the progress of their implementation? That's the approach that I've taken with some of my examples. Now, the first one I put in here really doesn't have a lot to do with client, but bear with me because it's a preemptor to the next presentation, but also something that's really important that you do when it comes to implementation, and that is to map your data feeds. So for those of you using data feeds going into Portfolio, you're probably aware that there is an auto mapping feature, so it will try and find the client and attach itself to the client. But if it can't find the client, you need to go into the unmapped area and map it to the client. So this is just a reminder that it's an important step in the entire process is to map the data feeds. Especially if you're going to present any confirmation of documents at the end of the implementation, you might want to show them their portfolio evaluation. All needs to be in the system before that can happen. Implementation threads are really popular. And there's two ways that we've looked at going about implementation process. So standalone task templates work really well. And a standalone task template for an implementation process might be something like salary sacrifice. And so you might have 3 or 4 things that you and the client need to attend to. There might be a form that you send the client that they need to submit to their accounts department, and then make sure that you can see that salary sacrifice has been applied. So you might be checking the data feeds and making sure that the super contribution figure is higher and the salary sacrifice is working, and then you might tick off that task template. So there's not a lot of steps. It just has a little checklist in there and you can follow it along. But for a more complex implementation, like apply for insurance or rollover superannuation, you get more efficiencies by creating a thread. And that thread would allow you to link email templates off the back of it. So if you think about those email templates we presented before, you might have, step 1 is to obtain the signed application form. So your email template might link to the application form and say, client, you've proceeded with our advice. You now need to apply for your NatWealth Super. Click this link and complete the application form online. Then the next step might be to make sure that they have sent off the rollover form for their existing insurance. So you might have another email template saying, here is a rollover form. Please send this off to REST to roll over to your newly established NetWealth Superannuation Fund. And that gets done. And then you might want to invest the monies. So you get a task to invest the monies. Off the back of that, it might start sending them, here is confirmation that we've processed your initial investments. Here is a portfolio evaluation because you've linked those data feeds. So those kinds of email templates off the back of your thread can work really well. Which is great because from a process perspective, you're doing your steps, your client is being communicated to, and those email templates are so good. Visually, though, how is the client going to see where they're at in the process? Because they might be getting lots of emails from you, but they're not seeing where they're at. So one of those is those implementation checklists that we talked about. So putting all of your strategies into a checklist with a tick box as they've completed each of those strategies. And you might pin this file note to Xplan so the team can track the progress as well. So that's an important one. I'm going to show you some Xplan stuff, but I need to kind of go through a few slides. This is what we used to do. So this was a implementation process image that we had created. And what we did was we looked at a 5-step process and we created a fully blue one. You might do red because that hasn't been done yet, and a fully green one. So everything's done. And along the way, this is kind of the gray was the step they were at, and the steps that were done changed to green. So that's how we kind of got around it. So we created these kind of images that were for insurance in this particular instance. We had one for superannuation, and we wanted to create a visual mind of where the client was at. So what you could look at doing is putting something like that into a pinned file note that might also be shared with Client Portal. So this is the insurance implementation file note, and this is the picture that we've got up to. And you would basically just swap out that picture for whichever one they're up to. Down here was kind of like my checklist items, what's been completed, what's outstanding. So once they get to that, stage, you might move it around and then pop the new picture in and simply tick it so that the client can see that on client access. It's one way that you could do it. You could do one file note per implementation step, creates that visual look. They can see where they're at in the process, how far along the process they're at. And that could be a really nice visualization for them. So for some processes and typical processes that you have in your business, something like this could work really well for you. And then, of course, you could have multiple file notes pinned at the top. So when you're in the client hub and you've jumped into the client for the first time, to access something, look up something, whatever the case may be, you're going to, sorry, this client's got a lot of data. You'll see that implementation checklist sort of ticked there. Also allows you to edit it from this page. You don't have to go into the file notes page to edit it. And again, that's shared with the client on Client Portal. We talked about checklists, so your ad hoc implementation tasks. What we're talking about there is having, steps to the process so that you can tick off where they're at in the process. So that is great for a standalone task. And a thread, I think we've covered well, which is step 1, step 2, step 3, email the client that communication after the fact. So again, look, there's heaps of AI tools now available for creating great images. So, you can go to town on that. Canva is great. We talked about all these online marketing picture programs last session. So again, where you get thinking about utilizing those to create these images. These were actually done, I think, in Word, using those word chart images and just creating colors. So super easy, nothing complex, no money spent. No money spared, of course, except for time to create these images, again, popping them into your workflow. The other one that you might look at doing is if you want a more collaborative approach with your client around implementation, then something like Whiteboard. Now, if you've on, again, majority of people we talk to, they're on Microsoft 365, and Whiteboard is included in your Microsoft 365 subscription. The other one that's similar is called Miro, and I'm sure there are other ones, Monday.com and things like that probably do something similar. But the Whiteboard visualization, I find quite well works well. It is designed more of a project management tool, but you could look at your different steps of implementation steps and kind of card out what they need to do and look at what's been completed, what's in progress, and what's yet to be actioned. So if we have a look at Whiteboard, I'm just going to open that up. Just opening. All right. So here is my example that I've come up with for this one. I'll just zoom in a little bit. We'll just kind of focus in on these insurance application and rollover. So as you're kind of working through the progress, so complete telehealth, once that's done, you just simply click and drag it over to completed. And maybe we're waiting on the confirmation of insurance renewal. And so these little cards can be moved along in the progress, and then you're kind of tracking where you're at with it. The other thing is, if there's extra steps, it's really easy to kind of copy and paste, and application or whatever it might be, form probably more than anything. So you can add to it. So really easy kind of implementation tool. And if you haven't used Whiteboard before, let's down here, there are a whole bunch of templates that you can load up. So you just sort of, I looked at project planning. I find that is the easiest one to kind of find. But there are other ones available as well, brainstorming ones where you might talk to the client about what they want to achieve. So this one here, put down all of their goals, what's now, what's in the future, what's, buy a yacht could be a really, unrealistic goal. This is really good for visualization with your client. And whiteboard can be shared if you've got teams, so you can share it amongst your team, and you can think about it as you have a whiteboard per client, with their implementation steps. You might have their goals on there, you might have their reviews, and you could use that and keep updating it every time you meet with a client. So there is no Xplan link to this, but it's a great little tool I wanted to share with you. And where you would get the Xplan link is you might just create a copy of that document, and pop it into the file notes to kind of track the board, with your client, and share that board on client portal so that they can also go in and update it as well. So that's the mirror board. Question, back to file to Xplan. So I'll have a quick look at that. Thank you, Chris, for your query. So we talked about up here the file to Xplan, about the ability for you to file it as an email or as a task. You can't do both at the same time, Chris. So if you did want to create a file note and a task, you would need to file your email twice, but you absolutely can drag and drop the first one, do your file note, drag and drop it a second time, and do your tasks. Having said that, you can do it a different way, as well. I'm going to demo that inside Xplan. So if you have created a file note in Xplan, even if it's come from file to Xplan, maybe it's come from you creating a file note requiring the client to do something extra or you to do something extra. Let's use this implementation one as an example. Under the related tab, the linking of the file note is who is the file note shared with. The workflow attachment is when you create a workflow item, who's going to get that workflow. So I do suggest that you come in and double check that you don't have workflow turned on for more than one, because you are going to get more than one task. So assuming that this is going to go to Taylor as the client that I'm responsible to this task for, that's all good. So here under actions, we can add a follow-up task from a file note. So this is a little bit different to file to Xplan, but add a follow-up task allows us to assign myself a task. Let's say it's due tomorrow, and it's a follow-up on the implementation process. So that's going to use that file note that I have created, and it's going to give me a task in my task list. And there it is, the follow-up of insurance. All right. So that's the other way that you can do it. File to Xplan, file twice, or for any file note, there is an action item to create a task off the back of a file note. Great question, Chris. Thank you for that one. All right, so we have gone through implementation. We've talked about visualizing it through a kind of a pipeline view of the progress view, versus you could also do a progress view in something like a whiteboard. And so it's really important from a implementation that we're talking about helping clients understand where they're at, whether it's an email template with an action item to do, or visualizing the implementation through a checklist, ticking off as they've completed stuff, or the part of progress images. So that's pretty much all that I wanted to get through in terms of the presentation today. And I'll give you a chance now to think about some questions that you might have um, around SOA production and using Xplan for outputs, for confirming to the client where you're at, helping that we're using Xplan modules to give great outputs, to implementing, keeping that communication up and visualizing where they're at. Next month, hopefully, you've all got that date in your calendars. We are going to be looking at the review phase. So, we're going to be looking at how do we engage with clients before, during, and after the review. So, we're going to be delving into more on that communication, visualization tools, and those sorts of things. So, make sure you come along to that one. While I've got you though, and before we finish up for today, does anyone have any additional questions around what we've covered off on the SOA and the implementation? No doubt you're all eager to go back and start thinking about your process. Workflow is your friend, email templates, putting down what is your process into email templates saves so much time. Cannot stress enough how important it is to have a really great flow process built into Worksplan now, how much time it saves, and how great the client experience can be if you are creating these nice, personalized, professional looking email communications, keeping them updated along the way. So I encourage each and every one of you to jump back in and think about now and schedule time into your diary to think about your process and improvements that you can make so that your client experience can be enhanced a little bit, utilizing hopefully some of the tips that I've provided here today. As you go through and start implementing some of those things, obviously reach out if you have questions. But really, it's around getting that communication piece right. What do you want to say to the client? And then following that up with making sure it's automated as much as possible. So I've just had a question that's come through. Thank you, Deb. What date is next month's webinar? So I'm just going to open up Xplan Expert for us all to have a quick look at. Um, if you haven't got them in your diary, please do. Training schedule for 2025 in Melbourne times. Our next one is the 13th of August, Wednesday, the 13th of August at 1 p.m. Deb, hope that you can come. For those of you who haven't got it in your diary, please lock it in. Of course, you can lock in all of the rest of the dates for the rest of the year as well. So that if you like the topic, you can come along to those webinars, which will be on new topics each month, except for obviously next month is locked in, which will be the client experience review process. So hopefully you can join that. All right, guys, we have finished a little bit earlier, but hey, great. Get 15 minutes back into your day, or use this 15 minutes to jot down your great ideas for client engagement in the SOA preparation, presentation, implementation phase. And I look forward to seeing you all at the next session in August. Thanks, guys.